Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter.
How are you?
Very well, Peter. And yourself?
Yeah, can't complain. Autumn's definitely here at the moment, isn't it? On my drive to work this morning, I noticed lots of the lovely red leaves that have gone from the yellow to the red, and next they'll be falling off, won't they? So it'll be fireworks night soon as well.
Yeah, that's very much so. And the beech trees are looking marvellous, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think autumn is always a lovely time of year for the colour and the red sunsets at night. So. Anyway, on to more pressing things. Who have we got on the show today, Chris?
Right, today, Peter, we've got Alan Down, who an incredible chap with over 50 years experience working in various sectors of horticulture, from a plantsman to a journalist to a garden centre owner, nursery owner, a traveller, a photographer. He's done everything,
propagator.
Basically. And propagator, yes. So we'll be delighted to chat with him on Dig It today.
Excellent.
Good morning, Alan, and welcome to Dig It. And where do we find you today?
Good morning, Chris. I'm in my studio, my workplace in the middle of our garden down here in South Somerset, in the lovely village of Tintonhull, which many people will know because of the National Trust property, Tintonhull Garden. But that's not mine. I'm at the other end of the village with a very new garden.
Excellent, good. And Alan, perhaps before we chat with you and find out a little bit more about you, before we start, we must congratulate you on your new role, President of the Horticultural Trades Association. You've been in the role for a few months now. How are you feeling about this wonderful role?
Well, it's not yet 2 months, but I'm still very much a new boy. But I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to take on the role. I've been involved with the Horticultural Trades Association for probably 50 years.
Oh, right.
Basically, whenever I've always been on a committee of some sort or other throughout my career in the retail side of horticulture. And nearly 4 years ago, we sold our business and our nursery, our garden centre and nursery, and I thought I'd retired. Mm-hmm. So it was a complete surprise to be asked to return to the Horticultural Trades Association as their president.
So, Alan, congratulations on the presidency of the HTA. Just for our listeners who possibly don't know, can you just give us a little description of what the HTA do and what they stand for?
Oh, certainly, yes. The HTA stands for Horticultural Trades Association. It was set up in, I think, 1899 by a group of nurserymen and seedsmen who felt that they should be working closer together and having their interests represented. Okay. And that core purpose remains. So the HTA represents the interests of its members, and those members are growers, retailers, landscapers, service providers for the above, manufacturers and distributors. So it covers a very big field. And in particular, the HTA represents the ornamental, environmental sector of horticulture.
Yep.
So we have approximately 1,400 members of varying sizes. Some are very large centres or multiple garden centres. One member has over 60 garden centres. And then we have some very small ones where it might be just the husband and wife running a business. So we are trying to reflect and support businesses of all sizes. Our headquarters are in Didcot. We've got between 45 and 50 employees. We've got a few vacancies at the moment. That's why that figure is 45 to 50. And the main role of the HTA is to support the members. And we do that in many ways, particularly in lobbying government. Right. So, for instance, we think about how garden centres were enabled to open during COVID, recognising the health and well-being that gardening and visiting garden centres brings to society. The HTA was very much apart, the prime mover in getting that recognised. So we also lobby government for having more seasonal workers, to upskill the workforce, to employ more, to represent the industry on peak use reduction, energy cost, water shortages, planning, but generally assisting government to reach its targets on greening and CO2 reduction, and many other things.
It sounds an enormous role you've taken on there. And it's a massive association. Yes, it's brilliant.
It is a massive association, but as I say, there's a big team, and that team is led by a senior leadership team that is now complete. In fact, not quite complete. We get a new chief executive joining in January, which I hope, will take some of the work that the president has to do. I'm sure that will be the case. And you might think, well, how does the HTA do this? Well, there's membership. The subscription is paid by members, large and small, and they vary according to the size of the business, contributes funds. But the largest funding mechanism is the gifting scheme. So that's the National Garden Gift Card. And that finances much of what the Horticultural Trade Association does. It's a very successful scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember as a child, it used to be the paper vouchers, and now you've moved forwards onto the sort of credit card style ones, haven't you? And yeah, it's a really good scheme because it's such a lovely present to, if you can't think of what plant to give your mother or your father, it sorts it all out. It's perfect.
Yeah. It's a lot easier than posting a tree, isn't it?
Most definitely, yeah.
So that's the prime mover in terms of financing. But the HTA also provides training. A lot of it is e-training for staff of nurseries and garden centres. They also agree standards of plant quality and other things. They provide support services, be it human resources, insurance, banking, energy efficiency, packaging, waste, and so on.
Yep.
But the gifting scheme is really the driver, the National Garden Gift Card.
Excellent.
So there are other events that the association organises. The National Plant Show, which is primarily a trade show, and that grows every year. And that's held in June. An annual conference for the members. Looking forward this year, for instance, we're trying to predict what the garden industry will look like in 2030. Not an easy matter, particularly with the background of what was going on and still is going on in politics in the country. And then there are other smaller events, like there's a one-day conference for growers called Contact, and the Association of Professional Landscape Awards. So the HTA's meeting and networking with the Garden Industry Manufacturers Association, the Growing Media Association, NFU, Royal Horticultural Society, Garden Centre Association, and many, many others. It aims to be the one voice of ornamental environmental horticulture.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty detailed description of what you guys get up to. I mean, thank you very much. It's brilliant. And what can I take a step back, Alan, and ask? What was the first thing that got you into gardening? Can you remember all those years ago? Was it growing some cress, or was it what got you interested in it?
No. I mean, my family on both my mother's and father's sides have been dairy farmers or cheese makers for generations, and I got into gardening by being interested in wildflowers. They tell me that at the age of 4, I went missing, and my father had at that time a rented farm, a small rented farm, a start-up farm that Somerset County Council provided to get people on the bottom rung of the ladder. So relatively small, and there were 6 of these farms, and so everybody dropped everything and they went searching for me at 4 years old because I'd gone AWOL. And I was found in the middle of a 13-acre of wildflowers, quite happily sat there picking flowers. So I think that's how I started.
Excellent. Enjoying the nice
But
environment. That's brilliant. That's
yeah, but I also should point out I have 4 brothers,
great. Right.
and 5 into a small farm doesn't work. So I was very happy to get into horticulture rather than look at the backside of a cow all my life. Yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah, Alan. On the basis of that, so you moved on from wildflowers to going to college. How did that sort of fit in with your interests at that point?
Well, yes. But first of all, perhaps I should point out I went to a boarding school called Brymore School near Cannington, actually in the village of Cannington, which you'll probably recognise as a college. I'll come to that in a minute. Cannington's college is also in the same village, and Brymore School taught agriculture, but also had a horticulture department. So that fed my interest of horticulture. But then I went on to have a couple of years of practical experience before going to Cannington College on their commercial horticultural course.
Right.
And subsequently, the next year, I then went to Pershore College of Horticulture to join the intermediate course, or it was shortened to, and you can imagine, student intercourse. Which was preparation for the intermediate course of the Master of Horticulture, or in those days it was called National Diploma of Horticulture, which was run by the Royal Horticultural Society and Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food.
How did you find your college years? Were they enlightening, or was it?
I thoroughly enjoyed them. I enjoyed every moment. I suppose I was a bit of a sponge. I was so enthusiastic about horticulture and everything that it involved. And I must say that thinking back, I have to thank a couple of Stuarts, Stuart Brookfield, who was head of horticulture at Cannington College, but also Stuart Chambers, who did the science part of the course. And Stuart Chambers also did the day release tuition, and I took that at Weston-super-Mare, while still working at local nurseries. And Stuart was brilliant and just encouraged that germ of interest that I had.
Yeah, I think you sometimes need those sort of curators in your life, don't you? Those people who just give you that little bit of a push, and it just helps so much. So, from those college years, what about those sort of early years in working in horticulture? Where did that sort of take you, Alan?
Well, I'm in the West Country, near Bristol. I'm originally, I'm actually from South Somerset, where I live now. But most of my working life and the business I had was in North Somerset. So I worked at 3 or 4 businesses there, I suppose. 2 of them part-time. So half the week I'd spend at a very traditional nursery that grew tomatoes in ring culture. And then when the tomato crop was finished, they would be taken out, and we would then bring in 10-inch heavy clay flower pots, which had a part-grown crop of bloom chrysanthemums in them. They were desperately heavy. But the rest of the week, I was at a high-tech modern all-year-round chrysanthemum nurseries where day length was controlled. We were using growth hormones and a very tight schedule of production, both of spray chrysanthemums and pot mums. But then I felt that I needed to get more experience. In fact, was encouraged to get more experience by those employers. So I worked in the tomato nursery, where we also grew pot plants and bedding plants. And at the weekends, I worked in a local garden centre.
Wow.
So quite a varied space, which stood me in good stead for the Master of Horticulture qualification.
Yeah, I'm going to say a mixture of commercial horticulture and amenity and a bit of garden centre retail. My word, that helps the good old CV, doesn't it? Certainly.
Yeah. So then after getting, I stayed on at Pershore College of Horticulture after finishing the course there and getting my intermediate Master of Hort. I then took the finals as a member of the staff at Pershore College. And that, in completing that, I then decided I needed to get some experience abroad. So I moved to living north of Hamburg in North Germany, which at the time was arguably the most intensive area for hardy nursery stock, tree production, seedling production, but also container plant production. And I worked for a nursery in Schleswig-Holstein.
Mm. And because at Pershore you were doing grafting and things like that.
Yeah. I supported the fruit lecturer and taught practical skills of, as you say, grafting and budding and pruning and all the practical things that go with cultivating top and soft fruit.
Okay.
But at the same time, getting paid, studying at the same time, and also getting paid to do the same. But having access to the knowledge of all the lecturers and the library was incredibly useful.
Yeah, because I can remember the library at Pershore. It is a lovely old room and full of really useful books as well, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Alan, I believe you went to work for Hilliers. How does that sort of form on your timeline? Does that sort of happen sort of after you've done your end of your qualifications?
Yeah, absolutely. But that was actually after I'd been working in Germany, and
right.
I remember that I had in fact written a letter to Harold Hillier, who later to be Sir Harold Hillier, to inquire if they had any openings before I went to Germany. And indeed they had. They were quite keen for me to join them. But I decided that I would go abroad and gain experience and pick up a bit of language, because I tended to look out the window when we were doing languages at school and didn't really take much notice. So I went to Germany only knowing how to order ein Bier, bitte. Very, very important. So Robert Hillier and Brian Humphrey, then the production director, came to see me, and they were looking at other nurseries there, and they interviewed me in Germany and persuaded me to come back and start, really to continue building up what was then just a very small fledgling container production unit at Hilliers. When I joined, I think we had one or two sand beds. We used capillary sand beds. And when I left, it was about 25 acres of container plants. So dramatic growth during the period that I was a container enterprise manager was my full title.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that was a great experience working at Hilliers, because of course the plant range there at the time was unequaled. It was the biggest in the Northern Hemisphere by far, and I seem to recall growing at least 3,000 species and varieties in the department that I looked after alone. But I also was responsible for raising plants from seed, both in frames and glass houses, but predominantly seed production on field scale, which was fascinating because a great contrast to growing container grown plants.
Gosh, and I suppose that takes, in a way, you learn sort of new experiences, I suppose, looking at the different types of seeds and how they respond, what sort of conditions they need to germinate. Absolutely.
And absolutely. A lot of the information we gleaned, and that's a bit of a pun, isn't it? Gleaning seeds, yeah. We got was from America. A lot of the information came from there, but also from Germany. And that was the time when the International Plant Propagators Society was really getting going, and sharing of knowledge between propagators was commonplace. Whereas if you went back 10, 15 years before, perhaps 20 years before, the knowledge of how to propagate a plant was held very closely to the chest of the propagator, and it wasn't shared. So there was big change at that time.
Big cultural change.
So I was quite active in the International Plant Propagator Society then.
And did that allow you to learn lots of new techniques for sort of budding and grafting and sowing seeds and that sort of thing?
Well, not particularly. I mean, I got those skills already, but the seed production of trees and stratification was something that it varied from species to species or genus to genus. The use of acid, for instance, for breaking down the seed coat. Stratification was, of course, is of course mimicking seasons. So kidding the seeds that it's had a winter by putting it in a fridge and then back out in the heat and then back in the fridge again. And that way the seed would think, oh gosh, I've had 2 winters. All my seeds will germinate. Mm-hmm. So it's playing around with creating the conditions that are ideal to get a good germination of seeds that would very often otherwise come up over a whole number of years, quite a few years. What we wanted was a maximum germination in 1 year.
Excellent. And thinking back to those Hilliers years, is there any sort of tips you could share with our listeners on plants, maybe for the plants growing? Mm-hmm.
There are some, but I think I'm in the way that I credited the lecturers that I had. I must say that I have a great thanks to say to Sir Harold Hillier, who was probably the finest plantsman alive at his time, and of course to the one who is alive now, but Roy Lancaster. Roy Lancaster is a close friend who we used to go out with, taking the students, because we had a student program at Hillier, taking them out to visit nurseries or to go on a fungi foray or go and look at trees in the New Forest. So that was wonderful to be with them. But in terms of tips to share with the listeners, I think if you've got plants in pots, don't leave potting on too late, because once the plant stops, it's quite hard to get them going again. Mm-hmm. So never, ever be afraid to look at the roots, knock it out the pot, have a look. Mm-hmm. Use a well-structured compost that's got plenty of air in it, but also holds water well. And good drainage is vital. So those things make all the difference to growing plants in containers.
Thank you. That's really useful.
And obviously, with the new peat-free sort of movement now within the industry, have you got any tips on which composts you found have worked well that are peat-free?
Well, the industry is presented with a huge challenge, and you might argue that perhaps it's been slow to move forward on it. But the reason it's been slow to move forward is that there isn't sufficient volume of good quality alternative to peat readily available, and so as a consequence, we are all learning as we go along, both the compost manufacturers and those using the compost, whether they're growers or amateur growers. But I've had greatest success with Melcourt's Silver Grow compost.
Yeah, it's a very popular one.
I've found quite consistent. I've also had good success with the New Horizon compost, but one thing I think I should say is that many of these composts, reliant on green waste, can break down quite rapidly. So it depends a lot on what you're growing. If you're growing a short-term crop in it, a plant in it that matures quickly, like a bedding plant or maybe salad vegetables, and it's going to be planted out, then perhaps the fact that the compost breaks down quickly is not important. But if you're putting a maple tree in a pot that's going to be in that pot for years, then it's very, very important. So I would go for a coarser compost for the perennial plants, the woody plants that are going to be in containers for a long time. Yeah. But the other thing I think to be aware of is that fresh compost is far better than something that didn't sell last year and still on the shelves from the previous year. Shelf life, I think, of the peat-free alternatives is something that we are finding is not nearly as good as peat-based compost. So just a word of caution there.
That's interesting, because the other thing that we found is sort of the water retention on a lot of the new compost it isn't quite there yet, and adding sort of water retaining gels and that sort of thing does help a little bit to improve them. But yeah, it's certainly a big new frontier, isn't it, at the moment?
It is. It is, and we'll get there. But we're all going to have to adapt what we do. We can't expect to continue watering in the same way we did with peat compost, in the same way that we didn't do that when we moved from John Innes compost to peat-based compost. And I'm old enough to remember that.
Yeah, so am I. Scarily.
Yeah.
Alan, you're obviously from your earlier days. What sort of happened is, I believe you did a bit more travelling around. Is that true?
Yes, I did. I've always been a bit of a traveller, and I think it probably comes back to having a Nuffield Farming Scholarship Travel Award back in 1980, when I was fortunate enough to get a travel award to spend 8-9 weeks in USA and Canada looking at the production and marketing of container-grown hardy nursery stock over there. And I visited 23 states, and and I've been to a lot more since. So I think I certainly would have visited more states than many Americans, and I think it's a wonderful place to visit. So that kind of got me into traveling, and since then, my wife Felicity and I have visited most of the countries south of the Sahara in Africa. We're great Africa lovers. But also India. We love India too. We had a great trip to the Himalayas, the Kingdom of Sikkim, which is managed by India, but it's a separate kingdom. It's a wonderful, magical country where we trekked in the foothills of Kanchenjunga, actually getting up to about 17,000 feet, so not a mean feat.
Yeah.
We've been to Costa Rica, the Pantanal in Brazil, very exciting place for animals. We're into animals as well as plants. And one more recent trip was to the Inside Passage of Alaska to look at whales and orca and bears, which is a brilliant trip too. So, yeah, we're great travellers.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been to a few places. That's brilliant.
Yeah, we've been lucky.
And are there any groups of plants that you particularly like, Alan?
Yes, I've been a great fan of hellebores and did quite a lot of breeding and selection before moving from our garden centre, Cleve Nursery and Garden Centre near Bristol. I had a huge collection, well over 100 different distinct looking Helleborus hybridus types. Okay. I concentrated on those rather than the Niger type. So those have been an interest, and I brought some 40 or 50 of those to the garden here, but nothing like the big range I had, which we were breeding and growing to sell at Cleve Nursery. But the other interesting groups are, I like hardy ferns. I think they're such underrated plants. They're so easy to grow and pest and disease free. And ornamental grasses. But it doesn't stop there. You know, I'm a plants person. I'm a plantsman.
Indeed. Alan, you just alluded there to your nursery at Cleve Nurseries. Can you tell us a little bit about how that sort of started? What was the germ of getting involved in retail? Very, very much.
Well, I think it was having done the Nuffield scholarship and seeing nurserymen in USA in particular that knew precious little about about nursery production and were making success of it. I came back and I thought, well, I'm sure if they can do it, I can do it. And so I decided to leave what was a very senior position at Hilliers and with a good future, and go out on my own or with my wife, great supporter, she's been, and we've worked together. We found a rundown nursery, which ironically I'd worked at many, many years before, briefly. The nursery had just a great position on a busy road. And if you're going to have a retail nursery or garden centre, position is everything, and this had it. So we negotiated initially as to go in as the active partner with a sleeping partner behind, and in the end we said no. Look, we'll take the lot. We'll take this on. And our savings, unfortunately, were small, and they all went into saving what turned out to be a lovely cottage on site, which is nearly 400 years old. But it was a wreck. We just went back to just the walls and had to build again. So all our funds went into that rather than into the garden centre. But at that time, garden centres were growing so rapidly. The demand was huge. But we doubled turnover rapidly, and our biggest problem was to keep stock on the shelves. So we were very lucky in that sense. So we kind of hit the ground running. We had a tiger by the tail. That was back in 1983. Roy Lancaster came and planted a couple of trees to officially open the revamped what then was rather than a retail nursery became a garden centre, but we continued to trade as Cleve Nursery. And then, I guess, would it be about the year 2000, we bought a small holding opposite where we went back into growing plants so that we were almost, I think about 60% of the plants we grew 60% of the plants we sold were homegrown. So we grew a diverse range, particularly of herbaceous plants, hardy ferns, hellebores, and shrubs, but also specimen plants as well on the small holding site we had nearby, and fed the garden centre from that.
Excellent, because a lot of sort of nurseries specialise just in very singular sort of varieties of plants, whereas it sounds like you were able to grow all sorts, but then with your background, I suppose that was one of the benefits of all your skills that you picked up along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we knew what we could sell, get a busy weekend on the garden centre, and Saturday you've sold a block of something that looked really good, lots of flower on it. Well, Saturday evening I was going to get more, and so Sunday morning everything was restocked. So that was a massive benefit that not everyone has.
Yeah, because if you've got your own stock to pull from, there's some massive benefits, isn't it?
Yeah.
We had to wait a week unless it was a pansy or something we'd grown ourselves here. But
yeah.
So, Alan, we met back, I think it was back in 1997 at the National Amateur Gardening Show, didn't we? At the Royal Bath and West Showground. And I think it was that particular show, you had a wonderful garden you created for that show. Those shows were great fun, weren't they?
They were great fun, and they were very well run. It's just a shame that they don't run them again. I had a lunch meeting with the new chief exec of the Royal Bath and West Showground only last week, and we were talking about that and talking about possibly getting something going again. But we shall see. That was a September show, and September's become a crowded time for garden shows. We were also very much involved with Bristol Flower Show, which the Royal Bath and West Show Society took on too, both of which, sadly, both National Amateur Gardening Show and Bristol Flower Show failed after quite a short time. So, yeah, and I'm trying to think what exhibit we might have put on there. Did we have was it with the Edible Bus Stop group with a taxi on the garden? Chris, do you remember?
Yes, I think it was actually. Yes, and it was something very innovative, and it was getting an awful lot of interest, if I remember rightly, because I know I came and had a chat with you, and I think it was probably Felicity as well to talk through what you were doing, because we were reporting on the show for the magazine at the time. But it was just such a good
Uh-huh.
thing. Do you think, though, September for a gardening show, in view of the changes in our climate now, do you think September planting is something we need to be concentrating on as gardeners?
Oh yeah, definitely. And in fact, I've been tweeting about it this week. I blog a lot, and I've been promoting autumn planting, and I think
Mm,
we should continue to promote that, because the reasons are good. The soil is warm. There's a good range of plants available. You plant them now. The winter rains look after them. They've got some roots already established come spring. And they aren't trying to put leaves and flowers out without being fully established. So you get better results, but they need to be hardy plants.
yeah.
They need to be hardy plants, not tender plants, and they need to be plants that perhaps you avoid the Mediterranean style group of plants. So those with woolly leaves, grey leaves, hairy leaves, they don't like the winter wet, so they're best planted in the spring.
Yeah, for sure. I think that message is easier said than done getting across to customers, especially new gardeners who, at the end of the day, are tempted by impulse buying, aren't they? I think that's the issue I think garden centres have these days. But no, I remember in the early 80s, the HTA, nature's natural time for planting was the slogan.
Yeah.
I can remember it now, and perhaps, as you say, we need to revisit that over the next few years.
But I was just thinking about that National Amateur Garden Show, Chris. I think that was with the Edible Bus Stop Group. People are probably wondering what the Edible Bus Stop Group is. Well, the Edible Bus Stop Group were originally guerrilla gardeners who became a bit more official, I suppose. They produced Boris's first pocket park. They've been involved with the Olympic site in planting trees there recently. They are kind of off the wall group in London, and they call themselves the Edible Bus Stop Group because the first big project they did was to try and use waste space around a bus route in London, South London, and use that waste space to grow food and flowers, but particularly food that with the community growing it. And they found, and we supported them through all their projects, they found that this was a particularly valuable cement for society. It brought people together of all different backgrounds, ages, and ethnicity. And I still believe that is a very, very, that horticulture has a very strong role to play in bringing communities together. And that's why we get involved with the Edible Bus Stop Group. I'm their horticultural advisor. And when they ring, I think, oh my God, what crackpot idea we going to pull together this time? Yeah, very challenging, but it's great. Yep. Great fun.
Excellent. And are they anything to do with the fact that there's a lot of bus stops now where the roofs are being converted into sort of green spaces? Is that anything to do with them?
Not them directly, no. But it's very encouraging to see that, isn't it? And for insects in particular, yeah. No. They haven't particularly gotten. There are lots of different guerrilla gardeners. This is the particular group that we've done most with, and they're, of course, predominantly London-based. You might think, well, our garden centre and nursery was around Bristol. Why did we do that? Well, because we believed in it, really, and we believe in, we helped get Chelsea Fringe going in Bristol. And, getting that message across, getting a conversation across, I think it's very, very important.
So most definitely.
Leads on to my next question about writing and broadcasting on the radio. How did you get into that?
We'll take the radio first. I think right from the word go, 1983 was when we moved from Hilliers to Bristol area. I can't remember exactly. I think that I know. We used to listen to Radio West, which was running then, and we felt that some of the presenters who were on the radio as gardening experts were very slow, very ponderous, and not particularly amusing, terribly serious. And the presenter felt the same thing and said, well, why don't you come on? Let's see if we can make it a bit more fun and hook listeners in more. So we started
Excellent.
with Radio West, and then Radio GWR, and then Radio Bristol, and I still do a monthly slot on Radio Bristol. I was on this last Sunday in the morning. But once you get on those, you get your name out there, and they have your telephone number. They tend to ring you up for a comment on, daffodils are flowering early this year, Alan, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But on the writing side, well, I guess that was on the back of having a TV series, because initially what we presented on the TV program was ghost written for us for the local newspaper, and I would have to review it. And in the end, I thought, well, it's better than I write it. So I started writing for the Western Daily Press and Evening Post in Bristol, and then that went on for 17 years or so, and was networked across 6 titles in the Southwest. So I became the regular writer that was in the local major newspapers of the Southwest.
Wow.
That's good.
And that has ended now because of COVID, because, well, newspaper sales have been declining for some time, so they're always constantly looking to reduce budget, so to cut costs. And so at the beginning of COVID, all freelance writers were let go. But I used to write a double-page spread every Saturday for those 6 titles.
Gosh.
And at the same time, I thought, well, there's an opportunity here to give it more life rather than that newspaper becoming fish and chip paper. The articles I wrote, I started making into blogs. So on website, play on my name, Down to Earth, with dashes between down and to earth, .co.uk. I've got something like a couple hundred blogs on there, all gardening blogs or travel.
Brilliant.
And so that's the writing side of things. But I have continued with writing, and I think you're going to ask me about Candide, the gardening app.
Indeed, yes.
Okay, so the gardening app Candide is something I've worked a lot on. Until 18 months ago, or maybe a year ago, I was the principal writer of content for the app, and also I supplied them with a lot of images. And so I write there as Alan Gardenmaster, that was good to keep my hand in and continue writing, and also be involved with what is a less experienced gardener, and also a much younger audience.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it's disappointing that the Candide app has slightly lost its way. It's not being populated and funded in the way that it was when I was writing for them. We had a staff of 70, so a massive investment.
Wow.
You couldn't, keep that going forever.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's the Candide gardening app, and I presented quite a lot of videos for them as well.
So it sounds like you've really evolved with the times, and gone from sort of a pen and paper through to keyboard and now telephone. That's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you find the new technologies easier to work with or harder to work with? I mean,
no, I wouldn't say easier. It's a challenge, and I like a challenge. Yesterday I was cursing my IT system here for various things, and it seems to be a fairly regular thing. And I do find it frustrating in that I don't have somebody to readily call on and say, look, this is the problem. Can you tell me what to do about it? But good old YouTube helps you out, doesn't it?
it's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
Someone else has had the problem.
It fixes all sorts of problems, YouTube, definitely.
It does. Yeah.
And I was going to say, Alan, obviously you are out there when it comes to social media, Instagram and such like, and you also love photography. I mean, that to me is a marriage made in heaven. Can you tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed? What's your greatest sort of claim to fame within the Instagram and sort of photographic?
Oh my
world?
goodness. Oh no, I think probably Instagram. I wouldn't claim to be famous even. I don't have that many followers, but I do enjoy doing it. I'm not sure I fully understand how to use the system as well. I'm on there as at Alan E. Down, and I do find it interesting to follow other people and see what they put on there.
Mm-hmm.
The social media platform I have greatest success with it, and I'm also on there as at Alan E. Down, is Twitter. I can understand that more and work that more, and LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. Okay.
But Twitter's the one I tend to go for first and foremost. I don't use Facebook much. I find Facebook, I tend to use Facebook for close friends and family, but I also find it irritating in that it's suggesting things I might be interested in, and I'm not in the slightest bit interested in those things.
all to do with algorithms, isn't it? Terrible thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
And the love of photography, Chris, you said. Yeah, I've always been interested in photography and have a big library of images of plants in particular.
Mm-hmm.
But wildlife too. I'm still very much an amateur, but yeah, I do love capturing a moment. That particular plant in that light. The best light, evening or morning, or clouded rather than bright light, and video as well. I'm trying to learn more about good videography. But that requires a little bit more time and certainly a bit more effort on my part.
Yeah, most definitely. Can we just go back to some more of the pressing issues of the gardening industry at the moment? I mean, sustainability, the cost of living crisis at the moment, and I'm sure these are pressing for many of our listeners on the peat-free side. I know we've sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but how do you think? What are your thoughts at the moment on this new era of growing plants? I mean, with climate change and the compost we've got available to use.
Well, that's a massive question, isn't it? I think that we are where we are. We need to adapt. We need to think about sustainability and the impact we have on the world. But the horticultural industry is in a good place, really, to help with that. Plants are great at cleaning up the air. Obviously, there's the desire to plant more trees. I'm concerned that it's not necessarily joined up. It's all very well the government saying that we need to plant X million. We need to have the capability to grow X million plants, young trees to plant out. But also we need to look after them after they're planted. I'm always concerned about the type of tree that's planted. It needs to be appropriate for the situation, preferably, definitely native, and preferably have seed that's collected locally rather than Scots pine seed that comes in from, say, southern Germany or some other part of the world. So that's important. Yeah, sustainability is something that the Horticultural Trades Association is looking at closely and supporting its members in terms of doing the right thing, using the right products, helping to develop the right products, dealing with waste effectively. So, yeah, that's one of our big roles, in fact, at the moment. There are big challenges ahead.
There are indeed, yes.
Yeah, I mean, one thing... But we were very lucky to be serving a customer in our garden centre one day, and this lady sort of stood back and she paid, and she said, "You ever thought about doing TV?" Felicity and I fell about laughing at that stage, and she was quite serious. And that's how we got into having our own TV gardening series filmed every week in our garden.
Oh, okay.
Which we did for 6 years. And I have to say, she said, "Yeah, no, husband and wife team would be good, especially if you argued on screen, that the ratings would go up." So we drew the line at that. But we did film nearly 150 30-minute programs from our own garden. So we ran over 6 years. They thought they would run it for, I think it was a 10-week series initially. Yeah, it was 10-week series in the spring, and it was obviously going well. And they extended it with a break in the summer to 13 weeks by doing some in the autumn. And then I think all the cameramen and the film, the team. The production team thought, well, that's it. We'll do something else next year. But there was such a demand, and it was so popular. They said, well, will you do another year? And on it went for 6 years. And it was very much about garden. It was called Garden Calendar, and it was filmed for Harlech Television and was networked by Meridian, some on the Discovery Channel, Anglia as well picked it up. And it was a daytime program, but it was very much about what to do in your garden that week and why is often not explained. But if you understand why something's done in a way, then you're a lot more likely to remember to do it that way in the future, and have a deeper understanding of what goes on and what makes plants grow and perform well.
Excellent.
So it was great fun to do it.
So I guess that's why you look so polished on the HTA presentations that I watch every week or two. That's where you learn your skills as well.
That's not how I see it. I think I'm very rusty. I've got to do one of those today, and I think every week they give me more and more complicated things to say. And this week is particularly complicated. So wish me luck. Yeah, so that's a blog I do once a week for a weekly update for the Horticultural Trades Association members.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, when it pops into the inbox, I think yes, we're going to be informed, and hopefully, yeah, it's always a good watch and listen, Alan. So good luck with your next one.
Yeah, good. I'm glad someone's looking at it.
When we were doing a little bit of research on you, Alan, like we do, we did come across something which did seem a little bit off topic. However, knowing our customers at the garden centre here at Buckingham, who know we have issues with muntjac deer, this might be interesting. Yeah. And we read that you studied a little bit about deer management, which seems a little bit odd, but I'm sure it probably wasn't at the time for your good self.
No, I've always been a practitioner in country sport. Mm-hmm. I love the countryside, and I love the things that are in it. And I think that deer, in particular, are particularly beautiful animals. I wouldn't say that necessarily about the muntjac.
Can I say even the muntjac is a sort of short, fat little.
It's a bit of an ugly beast, but when you see it in India, in Assam in particular, it seems appropriate there. But here it is an introduced deer that escaped many years ago and has proved to be highly successful and quite damaging, particularly in gardens. They live in your garden, but also real concern is that destroying the understory of woodland and browsing on regenerated trees, so that we aren't getting natural regeneration in the way, but the knock-on effect of them browsing, feeding on the understory is wide, in that so many insects and butterflies and beasties rely on the cover of that understory, and flowers, of course, and plants themselves. So I got into deer management for various reasons. I used to be a shotgun shooter, reducing numbers of pigeons that were eating corn crops. I grew up on the farm, so it's not really surprising that I shoot. I shoot less that sort of thing now, but everything I shoot, I consume. If I don't consume it, then there are friends who consume it. So it's harvested wild meat that isn't wasted. So I studied deer management. I was trained under the British Deer Society, so I'm a fully qualified deer manager, and I manage deer not far from here in West Somerset at the moment. And the prime reason I manage them there is that, and this is not very pleasant, they're roe deer, which I think are the most beautiful of all our native deer. And what does a young deer do if it's under threat? It lies still in the grass. And these farms that I control and reduce the deer numbers on are used for growing grass, 5 cuts of silage every year, and those deer will go through the machinery. And it's everyone hates it when it happens. So we try to reduce the numbers down from that point of view, harvesting a renewable, healthy meat at the same time. So there we are. So that's my other interest when I'm not gardening is actually deer hunting and management.
So for those customers at the garden centre here who have issues with muntjac, any sort of tips on deterring them from your garden? What sort of advice could you give us?
Well, the best thing is if it's practical, is to fence them out. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but it's not a pretty thing, but it does do the job. We fence them out of our garden here. We fence them out of the garden centre when we're at Bristol, and it is effective, provided you close the gate, of course, because I've seen so many times the gate's left open and they'll just walk in.
That's it. Or you don't maintain it and the fence gets a hole in, and then, here at the garden centre it's bunny rabbits as well that we have quite a few of hopping around the field. And again, if you put a good old fence around whatever you're trying to protect, it does work, and as long as you shut the gate.
Yes, absolutely.
Alan, we usually at this point in the podcast we like to put our guests on the spot. And we've shipwrecked you on a desert island. This might be a difficult one for you, but which plant would you wish that you could plant and enjoy on your desert island?
That is so difficult. You say desert island. You haven't specified which part of the world it would be. If it's tropical or if it's temperate, and that would obviously influence it. If it's temperate, I'd probably go for an apple tree.
Okay. Good choice.
They store well. I enjoy eating apples. You can make juice from them. The wood, the prunings will probably be quite useful for lighting a fire. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think probably an apple. If I was in the tropics, whoa, gosh, there's so many choices. I think it would have to be a citrus of some sort. I think it would probably have to be maybe a lemon or a lime, because I probably need some vitamin C. I think I'd go for a citrus there. Yeah,
great choices.
But that is so difficult.
Yeah.
And if it's a nice warm country growing lemons, you can always chop them up and put them in your cocktails. That's always a good treat, isn't it?
You could, and assuming I've got a line and a hook, I can put the lime or lemon juice on the fish I catch.
Yeah, make a nice ceviche. That's a lovely choice, isn't it? Brilliant.
Yes. Okay, and Alan, we usually like to end our podcast with a gardening-related joke or a funny tale. Is there anything you could share with us on that score at all?
There's quite a few I can't, but what I can recall from years ago, going back to the days with a lovely DJ called Trevor Fry on radio GWR. I used to do a Sunday morning phone in, people ringing questions. I think you probably do them as well.
Indeed.
And you never quite know what the next question is going to be. And a chap came on and asked the question. He said, do you know if it's safe to drink wine made from Portugal laurel berries? And I was trying to answer the question. And I thought, well, best thing is to be safe rather than sorry. I said, well, I think it's unlikely, but I'm not absolutely certain. Could you perhaps, because this is quite important, could you perhaps tune in next week when I'll have a definite answer for you. I'll look at the list produced by the RHS, the HTA, and Guy's Hospital. But there was a list at the time, and he said, "No, I want an answer now." And I said, "Well, I'm not absolutely certain. I'd like to be 100% certain. And could you not this next week? And when I have a definite answer for you." And he was absolutely insistent. And the presenter, Trevor, stepped in. And he said, "Why is it so urgent you know now?" And he said, "Well, I gave some to the wife, and I want to know if it's safe."
Oh my!
Brilliant.
Excellent.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't know to this day whether she survived or not, but it's definitely not something I would want to drink, and I don't think it is safe.
No, it isn't.
Probably not.
Not yes, no. It's prudence. That's the cyanide family, isn't it? The leaves are certainly.
Yeah, but that's in the stones. That's not in the fruit.
Right. Okay. Okay. Oh, excellent. Oh, that's well. I'll say a very dramatic way to end our podcast today with you. Next question I must ask Alan. How do our listeners find out more about your work? I know you've given them a little bit of a mention through the podcast, but could you just let us know again?
Yeah, sure. The blog and our website is called down-to, that's a TO, -earth.co.uk, and that's where you'll find my blog. And I'm on Twitter at Alan E. Down and Instagram at Alan E. Down. And LinkedIn, I think I'm on there as well. I keep it simple. Yeah. Oh, and of course, Candide is at Alan Garden Master.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today, Alan. It's been really interesting chatting to you, and I hope the listeners enjoy learning more about the HTA and all the things that you've been sharing with us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alan. Most appreciated your time today.
My absolute pleasure. Nice to chat to you, chaps. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.